Supporting scanning. In this section, we're going to have a look at how we can visually create hierarchies that the user will find easy to look at, to understand the relationship, to locate information and other aspects inside that hierarchy. So our call here, our rallying call, is to make scanning easy, as we said before. And part of the reason for this here is that whenever we all use software, we don't, unless it's something like a novel or a book where we actually are reading it, we scan the what's in front of us. We look for certain things and then we select those particular things. And those things, they could be words, they could be controls, they could be icons. We'll have in our mind something that we want to do, and then visually we will look to find something that triggers a reaction where we think, oh, I recognize that icon, or oh yeah, there's a word, there's a link that looks to be relevant to what I'm trying to find at this particular point. Now, there's a few things. We use scanning because we know that given a screen, we're typically interested in a specific thing. We don't need to be bothered with other things, so we focus on that one thing we want to do. Also, when we're using scanning, the notion of satisficing comes into this here, that we'll not scan the entire page and then think, okay, there was 3 things that looked to be of interest. What was the most relevant one? We're much more likely to simply scan the page. When we find something that looks of interest, we'll stop at that point and we'll select that. So these are important elements then, and we want to design our interfaces so that they support scanning. We know our users will engage in this behavior, so we want to make it easy for them to visually scan, easy for them to locate the things that they're looking for, to give them things that they can glance at and then to recognize, yes, relevant or not relevant. And we also want to make sure that the first things that they're encountering, they're not going to be dead ends. They're going to be things that will map onto what they want to do. So how can we support this? How can we do it better? And inside Don't Make Me Think, Krug sets out a number of different sections, and we're going to briefly highlight them here. There are going to be things around using conventions, about creating effective or more effective hierarchies, about breaking content up into different defined regions, about making it obvious what you can interact with, avoiding distractions, and about formatting content to support scanning. So we'll have a look at elements of all of those. And one of the things we want to make sure is just after mentioning is that whenever the user does select something, we want to make sure that it's not a dead end. It's not that they click and they select this and then they realize, oh, this isn't what I want. If that's the case, then we have kind of failed in terms of our ability to have an effective interface. And the image on this screen, I find a really quite interesting image. We talked about at the start of the course how we're wired up to identify and to look at human faces as something we automatically do. And you can see here's a heat map in terms of looking eye-gazing and where people look at. And the image on the left-hand side, where the infant is looking straight at the people, everybody looks at that immediately. We also seen inside that section when we were thinking about how people think that if we look at somebody and that person is looking somewhere else, we automatically look where they're looking. So the image on the right is where we see a person, we look at the person, we see there the infant looking out to look straight ahead but looking out to our right. So then we look to that, and you can see here how that one image provides an effective way of attracting attention and then directing attention to text on the page. So there are lots of different techniques that we can use to capture and to direct our users' attention. So using conventions as the first one, we routinely use conventions. There are lots and lots of ones that are established, and this ties into the broad notions of affordances and other related aspects. So anytime we look at something, we have built into us, built over time through experience, a whole set of expectations or assumptions. If something looks like this, then that's what it's for, that's what it will do. And we want to make sure then that we adhere to those. So you can see a stop sign here. If something looks like a stop sign, then we would attach the normal intentions to it in terms of it. You should stop at that particular element. Alongside that, if you see a shopping cart on a web page, again, it's a metaphor for where we can add items into that we want to purchase. And again, we're familiar with all of these aspects. So through our applications, we want to make sure that the things that we display, the controls, the symbols that we use, we want to help our users to be able to look at it and go, that's what it is. And we can use conventions then as a way of doing that more effortlessly. If we use an icon that users look at and think, I don't know what that is, that's not great, because we're not helping the user then select it. And probably the greatest crime we could do is that where we use an icon that suggests one thing, but then we do something different to what it suggests. That will really frustrate our users. And final point there is that in terms of the controls, the icons and other aspects, we want to make sure that we are consistent. Certainly throughout anything that we do in terms of interface design, and also consistent then with established conventions. Create visual hierarchies for scanning. This is the next bit then. So we do want to make sure that we, through our hierarchies that we create, that they support scanning. Mostly in Western countries, people will start up at the top left-hand side and then sort of work their way down. So knowing that, we can then position things on the screen. We want to make sure that elements that are visually more important in that screen, that they visually stand out, and elements which are related in terms of their feature, their importance, that they visually are related as well on the screen. So we're conveying the importance of elements and the relationship of elements in terms of the mental and implementation models. We're conveying those so that they align visually as well. How can we do that? Wide range of different techniques. First one, important elements are visually prominent. So if something's more important, we may have it displayed in a slightly larger font. We may use a more distinct color that is more vibrant and stands out, higher contrast. We may position it in a more important position on the screen in terms of where people are likely to start their scanning and then to migrate thereafter. Second point, elements that are logic related are also visually related. So again, as we mentioned there, if we have a number of controls or pieces of information that fit together, we want to make sure that visually they do so. We may group them in terms of they're co-located or contained in a certain part of the screen. We would still also be using the same visual style for them. So looking at their visual style, you'll see, oh, it's the same. And that helps us then to understand they are related, they are linked. And the final point, elements which are part of a larger containing element itself, they're showing to be visually nested. So if we have a range of controls or other aspects and they're contained within something, a particular section or entity, we want to visually represent that as well. So that again helps the user understand that for this overarching entity, these are the things that exist inside it. And if we delve a little bit more into this here, I mean, we've used web pages and software, all of us have, and because of that then we do establish a set of expectations for how things will look like. If you look at the screenshots you see in this particular page here, so for example the one on the left hand side, it's in Spanish, but you could look at this here and without even realizing it's in Spanish, you could go, oh, well, yes, you understand the structure, you understand where the navigational menu is, you understand where there are particular prominent sort of, this is an important offer that we're providing. If you look carefully at the screen, you see, oh, there's the shopping cart. So even though even though you may be using languages that you may not be familiar with, because visual structures are so powerful, we can look at that and we can visually, at a glance, understand where different elements are, understand how we actually could operate that. So even though you may not understand the particular language, if I were to give you a task to purchase a particular item, there's a reasonable chance you would be able to do it. Likewise with the newspaper, even if the language is not familiar, you can still look at that and you can understand what are the individual stories, what are the headlines, how are things grouped together. So we are set up for parsing visual hierarchies. We do it effortlessly, and we want to make sure through the interfaces that we do that we tap into the types of conventions that we have here so that users can look at it and just get it. If we find that our users are actually struggling, they have to to sort of ponder, to think about something, if they have to ask questions about, or how's this related, if they can't find something. These are all good indicators that there are improvements that we should be bringing about. Use names that are easily understood. So when we're picking names for icons, or in fact picking icons as well, or labels or other related aspects, we want to make sure that the names that we use, that they are simple, the user can look at them, can easily understand them, and can easily from that determine what their importance is. And the image down at the bottom here from Don't Make Me Think's a really good one. And it's a situation where if you have the user who is wanting to find job opportunities at a particular place, and they come in and they see a button, jobs. So it's a short word, is easily understood. They're likely to look at it and think, jobs? Okay, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Click on that. So that's ideal. The image in the middle is where it says employment opportunities. So that's 2 words. They're longer words. It takes longer for us to read this. It takes a bit longer then for us to understand employment opportunities. And generally, in terms of the language, the ideas that people would use, they will think in terms of, a job. They won't think, I want an employment opportunity. So there, it's a little bit more remote. They have to think about it a little bit before thinking, yeah, that's what I want, and then click on that. So it's not as good as just simply simple jobs. The third one, where you have a bit of a fancy name, Joborama, in that sense then it's enough to cause uncertainty. The user could look at it and think, well, it might be what I'm looking for, it may not be. They may click on it, and it may be, or it may not be, again, what they want. If they click on it as something else, we failed at that point. So Krug's advice then is that use simple, use direct terms, avoid technical stuff, avoid clever names, avoid anything that's sort of branded or market speak. You want to use things that people can look at, easily understand, and easily infer what that is about. Where you can't have names that are self-evident, they should be self-explanatory. So that's the next point then, that if there isn't a common name or term that you think, okay, all of our users will understand this, then you want to make sure through the label that is attached to it that somebody reading this here and just understanding the label will get the important aspects of what that label is for. So it should be self-explanatory. You read it and that tells you all you need to know about it. And the final one then is to looking at about some aspects about reducing visual noise. And there's 3 instances where we may end up with a particular sort of visual design that is not ideal, where we'd want to correct. And all these are examples of visually noisy pages. So the first one is in terms of shouting. So shouting, you can sort of see it on the this particular image here, where we have a number of aspects. Welcome to the shop. We have over here the latest. You have some bits down at the bottom. There's a number of prominent in-your-face elements that are all sort of saying things, trying to capture your attention. And if you have a lot of things on the screen shouting at the user to try to get things across, that is actually distracting, because then we can look at it and we see a lot of things trying to clamour for our attention, and that overwhelms us. We go then, well, okay, what's more important? I don't know. All of the things seem to be shouting. It effectively will lock down our ability to more easily parse this. Disorganized, which you maybe see then in the image there at the bottom, is where we have a number of different sections. And they're set out, but there isn't really any strong visual hierarchy here. There's positioned in a number of different ways. It's hard to understand, well, what is linked to what? Where is the hierarchy in this? Where do you start with? What's contained within what? How do you break it down? If that isn't clear, again, it's going to end up with us looking at it, not being able to discern any hierarchy or structure in it, and then getting confused. Or worse, then having to look at it to go through everything and try to infer a hierarchy from it. We should never, ever need to force our users to do that. And the final example at the top is one where we have a overly complicated and cluttered interface. So there's lots of different elements that are all set out. We do have some sort of structure to it, but there's very, very many parts to it. So looking at this, the user's presented with many, many different options, many, many different parts, And again, it's just too cluttered. There's too many options. We've presented too much stuff. And that's going to have the same effect. The user will look at it and go, oh, it's too much there. What's important? Who knows? So again, we want to make sure that we have those right balances. And certainly our user testing that we can do, presenting and showing things to the user, they do provide us with powerful ways then of understanding, are we clearly articulating what is important, or do we have too many elements that are clamoring for attention? Is there a good visual structure in terms of being able to say, well, you start here and then you go to this point? And are we presenting too much stuff on the screen at one time to our users? So that covers all of the things we want to look at inside how we can support scanning and make it a little bit better. We're going to go on now to have a look at text. And again, we'll think about how do we support easier scanning of text, and also how do we write and construct text in a more effective way to be used inside interfaces.